Thanks, Joan. Good morning. A big thank you from me for everyone who's doing so much to get on top of this outbreak. The response really is standing on the shoulders of every Victorian. It makes me so proud. What I would want to say is that we have observed people turning positive with the Delta variant at various points in their 14 days incubation period, their 14 days of quarantine. Some testing positive early, some very early, but also others who are turning positive late in that 14-day period. You do have to do that full 14 days of quarantine and get that late day 13 test in order to be properly cleared and released from quarantine. So regular testing is crucial to help us understand how the virus is operating and making sure it doesn't get out further in the community. We do have a number of cases in school settings. We thank the students, parents and the school leadership for everything they're doing to support the testing and the quarantine process. And thanks to all those Victorians who are turning out in big numbers to get their vaccinations. I saw my local GP, and thanks to the team there yesterday, to receive my second dose of AstraZeneca. It is a relief to know that I'm at a point where I'm going to get the fullest possible protection you can get from 2 doses of vaccine. It may be that there's a booster for me 6 months from now, but right now that 2 doses of AstraZeneca vaccine is hugely good protection from hospitalisation, from the risk of dying. So it is a relief. I hope all of those who are due to get their second dose of AstraZeneca or indeed Pfizer that's upcoming in coming weeks to book that in and to get that vaccine. There are plenty of appointments in the system for next week and into August. And there are new appointments that are opening all the time, so I encourage you to log in online and have a look to find a time. There are more than 35,000 Pfizer appointments available, including almost 24,000 for second doses. And there's also good appointment availability in our regional centres of Geelong and Bendigo. You may not be able to get an appointment at your nearest vaccination centre, so it is worth a look around all of those vaccination centres that might be in that next tier of distance away from where you live. Well, one of the 5 reasons to leave home is to get vaccinated. People do need to use common sense. We had a case last week of a couple from metropolitan Melbourne who went to regional Victoria looking to get their vaccine. Their ID was checked and it was noted that they weren't from regional Victoria. They thought it was a good excuse for a drive, but it really isn't. Please use common sense, get vaccinated at the nearest place and do not look for an excuse to get into regional Victoria. They were turned away. Thousands of Victorians are doing the hard yards in quarantine. That is such a critical part of us getting on top of this. The rest of the state obviously doing a fantastic job in lockdown. It is no easy task for anyone, but it is making the difference, and it is what's got us on track in terms of getting on top of this Delta outbreak, a significant Delta outbreak. We do need everyone to keep doing their bit in quarantine, in testing, in checking in wherever they go, and to run it to ground. So thank you.
Happy to take any questions you have. Well, I think getting the job done is the most important thing.
How do you do that?
Well, you would use, as we did, you'd use police, you'd use authorised officers, and if you could get support from the ADF, whether that was for logistics and things of that nature, or whether it was boots on the ground, all of those conversations need to be had. If Sydney has been declared a national emergency, then my message is very clear. On behalf of all Victorians, I'm saying there's a national responsibility to put a ring of steel around Sydney, just as we did last year, because that will help stop the spread of this virus across the whole nation. I want to be able to deal with our outbreak, have it settled, and then have thousands of contact tracers on the phone helping out Sydney. I can't do that while ever we've got cases to chase, and we've got to be on this kind of hyper alert, because there is, even with the strictest border closures that have ever been put in place, we've still got people moving around New South Wales and potentially spreading the virus.
Have you spoken to the New South Wales Premier about this?
No, I'll speak with her. I think all of us will have a pretty frank discussion at National Cabinet.
Why do you think Victoria is happy to have Bill?
Sorry?
Why do you think she's been reluctant to do it so
I'm not suggesting that she is.
You said Victoria would be happy to have it. Would that include sending some of our vaccines to New South Wales?
Well, I've got no request for a redistribution of vaccines that have been allocated. We have barely enough vaccine allocated to any of us. So the notion that we would be sending it away from here to... We've all got need, all of us, and they've been allocated fairly. And if there's additional supply, I'm not opposed to New South Wales receiving more, and in fact they have received more in the most recent bring forward because of the really difficult circumstances they face. Look, I think I don't want to be interpreting what the New South Wales government strategy is, but if it's lockdown until we all get vaccinated, like that's October or November. If that's the strategy, fair enough, but lock that strategy in. Right? Don't have that become the national strategy because it's not the agreed national strategy. It simply isn't. I make decisions for Victoria, but I'm a member of National Cabinet and I'll be making the point very clearly today. We need to contain this so that we don't have a national emergency in every part of our nation.
What would happen with the rest of Australia if they don't comply with this suggestion?
Sorry, what was that?
What do you think would happen with Australia if they don't comply with this
Well,
suggestion?
you've got cases come from Sydney and lockdown in Melbourne, lockdown in Adelaide. How many more states do we want locked down? You know, we did it, and this is not a criticism. I'm just making the point. We seem to have crossed a threshold today. There's now a national emergency been declared up there. Let's, as part of a national response, let's put a ring of steel around Sydney so that we don't finish up with cases spreading any further. And then we can all get back to doing what we do best, and that's working together, helping each other, where Victorian resources can, with confidence, instead of being on hyper alert for the next case that appears here, we can help out our friends in New South Wales, in Sydney particularly, to deal with the challenges that they face.
Do you think we need to reprioritise vaccines, quite particularly for those under 40 in the social critical industries, essential workers, what New South Wales have advocated? We've also seen here workers, say Frankie's, young Jacksons, younger people, despite the need to be prioritised for those who now that there's more reliance.
Well, I think we need to be very careful when having a discussion about who we prioritise. The fact of the matter is we don't have enough vaccine for everybody, and the virus will go to the unvaccinated. That's the way this works. Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, they're not open in New South Wales, and it's not my job to get the pubs open in New South Wales, Rich. So I'm not going to have Victorian vaccine go to New South Wales so that they can be open while we're closed. That doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm not talking about New South Wales, I'm talking about generally reprioritising the new stuff that's arriving.
Yeah.
All those essential workers under 40.
But that's an ongoing discussion. That happens all the time. Well, again, let's be clear on how much is coming. Like, it's very difficult to know how to ration it unless you know how much you've got. Seriously, I'm pretty sure listeners and viewers at home can relate to the concept. If you had to try and ration something and apportion it, but you don't know how much you've got in the first place, that's really, really tough. Really, really tough.
So Victoria still hasn't been told the 1 million doses that was heralded on Monday that were arriving. Victoria still hasn't been told how much of that we're getting.
No, I didn't say that. I think what you're talking about, though, is if there were further bring forwards, like what's on shore. No, but hang on. We're in furious agreement here, I expect. Seriously, what's on shore has already been allocated. I'm not aware of any plan to reallocate that differently. So therefore, my logic tells me your question must therefore relate to the next lot of bring forwards, whether it's 100,000 or 1 million doses, right? I can't, until I know how many are coming, have any real view on where we should allocate it. It gets really difficult because there are so many. This is the whole notion of having to ration is incredibly challenging. But unless you know how much is coming and when, they're really hard calls. That's why I'm not announcing any changes to that. I doubt very much that we're going to see, large amounts of vaccine that had been allocated to us being reallocated to others. But let's wait and see how that unfolds. They have. Yep. Well, the TGA are probably, well, not probably, I think they are the most rigorous drug and therapeutic approval agency They go through a rigorous process. It does take time. I think every Australian, every Victorian can have extra confidence in the decisions they make because they are made through such a rigorous process. So we can all have, I think, absolute confidence in the sorts of decisions that the Therapeutic Goods Administration make.
Is it too premature though? I mean, we don't even have our elderly vaccinated, we're talking about children.
No, we've got to get the entire community. We've got to get the entire community done. It is far better, I think, to have that matter now sorted, have that approval tucked away, rather than us have sufficient supply to start vaccinating kids and have the TGA not having done their job. I'm not here to defend the TGA. I've got to hold them in the highest regard for the work they do, but it wasn't so long ago that we were all criticising them for not getting their approvals done fast enough. I wouldn't criticise them for having got this done early. This is done. It can be put to one side, and when there's sufficient supply to move to younger people, then we'll have the approvals to do it. On the issue of assisting New South Wales with contact tracing, we're not in a position. If that was your question, I got three little insights to it before you got to, and then you didn't even get to ask it. Sorry. If that's your question, there was a request. We quite understandably through AHPPC, but I've made offers to Gladys. The answer back was, look, given we've got a bit to deal with ourselves, like 20,000 people locked at home, pretty significant outbreak, we can't at this time. But this is the point I'm making. If we can contain Sydney and not be all hyper worried that it's going to come here as another incursion or a third one, a fourth one, a fifth one, then we could, all of us, work together and help Sydney to contact trace, to do all of that work. I'm sure that additional people who speak second and third languages from Melbourne ringing people in Sydney would help. I'm certain that some of our experiences, practical experiences, we've got veterans of a long and challenging second wave who we can have help New South Wales. We just have to get the situation under control here first and be confident that it's locked into Sydney and not going to travel across into our state.
And that's part of the ban on Victorians coming back into Victoria.
Unless they get an exemption, yes. Yes.
When Spirit almost suggested that this could go on to October, the lockdown then, when would that change, that advice for Victorians being able to return home without an exemption?
Well, I would. Yeah, I'm not here to interpret what the New South Wales strategy is or to draw conclusions. I think you could draw that conclusion from what she said, but that's better. You're probably better to go and get her to speak to that. But on the issue of how long we will only allow people who get a compassionate exemption to travel back to Victoria, that decision lasts for 2 weeks, and we will review it at that point, and it'll be based on health advice. But it's a fair bet that if things have not manifestly improved in Sydney, then it will remain a very high risk zone for us, and we will not be allowing people to, as of right, return. Key workers, or if you like, permitted workers, will be like freight, extra testing. Every effort's being made. I make no apology for making really hard calls to keep Victorians safe. We all have to do that.
Yes. You said that the last lockdown we heard from Tro that you spoke to a lot of multicultural community leaders. Have you had feedback, and what else are you doing? Because we're still getting a lot of hesitancy towards vaccines through our media.
Yeah, look, I speak with multicultural leadership, multi-faith leadership all the time. My government does, every member of the government does, whether they be a backbencher as a local community member, right through to the Minister for Health, myself, Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Ross Spence, all of us, and indeed our public health officials. Engagement's really important. Getting information out is really important. And then recruiting trusted voices in many different communities to go and spread that word has been a feature of our success, and it will be a feature of our success as we convince people to go and get vaccinated for them, for their family, for every family. I would say, yes, there is some hesitancy in some quarters, but I don't think there is quite the hesitancy that we sometimes read about. My sense of it is that there are millions and millions of Australians who want to get vaccinated and can't wait for the supplies to arrive so that they can get the jab and a second jab to play their part.
There's a 45-year-old Victorian man who's currently on a flight back from Russia. He has multiple sclerosis and he's had a stem cell transplant, I should say, and some chemo over in Russia.
Yes.
His haematologist here in Melbourne on quarantine at home. Everything is being stuck to him to do that. He's being sent to a medi hotel. Given his immunocompromised severely, and we're seeing transmission, how he in hotel rooms between ventilation, doors opening, closing.
Sure.
You can say for his health. Why is he being sent to a medical hotel?
Well, they're judgments that are not made by elected officials. They're made, like me, they're made by medical experts. And we try and be as compassionate and as considerate and as reasonable as we possibly can be. I'm not briefed on the specifics of that case.
It doesn't sound like there's much compassion going on here, and his health is being put at risk when he gets back to Victoria. Could that decision...
Well, no, I don't. No, hang on. I don't. If the claim is that Victorian officials, many of whom are medically qualified to make these calls, are knowingly putting someone's health at risk, I just don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's accurate. That might be the opinion of someone, but my quarrel is not with this gentleman or anybody else. It's only with the virus, and we have to make some difficult calls. And what I was about to say was, if you want me to have a look at that matter, I'm more than happy to do that, in the interests of just double checking and triple checking that there's no other way. We have granted exemptions, but in very, very limited circumstances, far less so than I think some other parts of the country. But I'm happy to have a look at that offline. We wish this person well. It sounds like he's been through an awful lot, and anything we can do to balance what he needs with what all of us need, and that's a safe environment where the virus doesn't spread, we're more than happy to do that.
On the remove lists, yesterday Mr Foley said the police were the lead investigators.
Yep.
Today the Chief Commissioner said no, the Department of Health is the lead investigator. So
Sure.
who are the lead investigators and how is it?
Yeah, no, I would look. I think there's always significant interest in these matters. As I understand it, my briefing from like an hour ago is that the Department of Health compliance team have or are very close to finalising their work, and it's literally en route. It's being forwarded to Victoria Police. They may not have officially received the matter, which might well be why there were two different answers to the same question. If it's not with police, it's literally on the way to them, and they will do as they see fit. And I expect if you were to ask the Chief Commissioner the same question, on Monday, it's probably a different answer.
And you said not so long ago that anyone who breaks the law will become famous. So
No, I didn't say. No, hang on. I didn't say anyone. I said you had every chance, and to the extent that naming someone would support better public health outcomes in our state, I won't rule that out. I won't rule that out.
What about naming the company? So
I don't know the name of it. Well, I'm not here to name anybody today. I don't know that would necessarily support better outcomes in Victoria. What was important is that we have tightened up the freight code, we have tightened up the authorised workers, and we don't see removalists coming to Victoria anymore, at least for a period of time. Now, that'll be very inconvenient for a lot of people, but if they do come, they've got to get a permit, they've got to have a workforce that wasn't in that red zone. All of those issues have been dealt with. As for this company, as for these workers, Victoria Police will receive a referral and then will do as they see fit with that matter. As I understood it, I can't be certain, but as I understood it, New South Wales Police were looking at this, as well as I can only assume that South Australian Police would be too, given that they were in all three states. They're not in Victoria at the moment. I'm working hard to make sure they don't get back into Victoria, and New South Wales Police may well have a look at them, although they've got a bit on at the moment. The key point here is no one should be breaking the rules. Everyone should know and understand that if you do break the rules, you compromise your own safety and the safety of your loved ones, and you finish up in lockdown longer. It just doesn't make any sense. That's why these protests that are apparently scheduled for the weekend are nothing short. It's just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. You want to protest against something, protest against this virus by staying at home, following the rules and getting out of lockdown. That's the most important thing.
The Prime Minister has repeatedly said that he is appealing to the party as an advisory body to reconsider their advice as things change. I just wanted to know your opinion as a politician on you constantly said all your restrictions are based on health advice alone, but what role do advisory bodies have in this situation? Is it advice that is just accepted and implemented, or should it be constantly reviewed and challenged?
I spoke with the Prime Minister last night about a range of different issues, and I wouldn't say that he was challenging, and I'm certainly not challenging independent advisory bodies. But what ATAGI's done is it's looked at evidence and then it's made a risk rating. It's rated the risk of getting the vaccine with the risk of not getting it. Delta variant perhaps means you need to have another look at that. But I don't think that a group of scientists, and let's not forget this was till recently chaired by Alan Cheng, and you won't find, a better Victorian than him. Fantastic, brilliant mind, and a humble and diligent public servant who's done a fantastic job. We don't need to tell ATAGI to do that. I reckon they're probably looking at Delta, and they're looking at the fact that if you're not vaccinated, your chances of getting this in a wild outbreak is really high, and the health outcomes are terrible, and all the stuff we know. I reckon they'd be looking at that in some detail. What they do with those facts and those opinions and all of that and that evidence, I'd be confident that they'll be doing that work.
Freya, just on the ring of steel, did Victoria Police say it wasn't very effective and that's why they weren't doing it this time around?
No. In terms of keeping people from New South Wales out of Victoria, that's a different task than what we put in place last year, which was to keep Melburnians in Melbourne and Mitchell Shire for a fair bit of that time. They're two different tasks. One is about keeping people out, and it's a much smaller number, and one is about keeping people within a city, and that is really important. We did this last year. It was very intensive. It was very challenging. It was every car being stopped. But, if we want... You've got a national emergency in Sydney. Let's not have that turn into a national emergency in every part of our nation. That is not a good outcome for anybody.
But the Police Association said, forget whether it was on the lockdown before, when there was a debate about having another ring of steel, the Police Association said it didn't work.
Well, the numbers would tell a different story. I'm not here for a quarrel with the TPA, but the numbers, we went from many hundreds of cases a day to zero. Sydney is on fire with this virus, and we need a ring of steel put around Sydney.
Do you expect there to open up the quarantine facility by the end of the year?
I certainly hope so. I think we had slated 500 to be open in January and another 500 to be open some months later, 2 or 3 months later. So if we can do a little bit better than that, it's good news today. The Commonwealth's out there with the builder, and they'll be cracking on getting it done as fast as possible. That's so much better than trying to use accommodation for tourists as accommodation to quarantine this virus. It's really challenging. So a specific purpose-built, lots of open air, built for the task. That's obviously a much better outcome.
Have you spoken to other premiers ahead of the National Cabinet about this idea of Sydney being there to bring a deal? Have you got support for doing
No, it'll be a matter for other premiers to have their own views. Different states are in different positions. Like no one's getting into WA, and they're a fair way away from Sydney, fair way away from all of us, really. What the other position that other states take is a matter for them. I'm simply saying, as someone who's put a ring of steel around Melbourne, my view is that the New South Wales government needs to put a ring of steel around Sydney.
Do you think that's why case numbers were driven down, or was it because we were all compliant, people stuck to their rights, and the bubble?
Well, we had a very, very small number of people who were permitted to go to work. We had 1 hour of exercise at one point or another for 5Ks from home. We had a curfew. We had all manner of different things, and we had a ring of steel. And all of those things contributed.
Have you started talking to the AFL about the grand final, and given any likelihood or otherwise of crowds, would Victoria be prepared to concede the grand final if we can't get pro crowd or off-road crowd?
No, we're not making concessions like that. We're very focused on getting this outbreak under control. The signs are good. The trend is there. Thank you to everybody who's at home, not just under lockdown, but those 20,000 people who are at home and not leaving the house for any reason at all. Thank you to all of those who got tested yesterday. Thank you to our contact tracers, to everybody who's working hard to bring this under control. And then it's really important that we all focus on helping Sydney to bring under control their significant wave, their outbreak, whatever you want to call it. I can't do that. We can't. No one can do that until we're off this hyper alert. Until we've got some confidence that it is in fact contained up there. then we can all work together and try and bring it under some control. Particularly if it's going to be a longer term thing, if it's going to be, longer than next Tuesday or longer than weeks even. If it's a longer thing for them, then they're going to need all the help they can get, and we stand ready to provide that. But we can't do that while we are, having to be on such high alert for a case from there coming here.
Premier, should teachers be planning for more home learning?
Pardon?
Should teachers be planning for more home learning?
No. There's a. I think that's highly unlikely, and we'll know more about. Let's talk about the terms of post Tuesday midnight when I announce those things. That's not for today. That'll be, I'll boldly predict it'll be as close to that deadline as possible, because we want the most complete picture. But I wouldn't be drawing any conclusions. We're all working hard to get it off to get the rules off at midnight on Tuesday night.
So what's the advice for teachers right at this moment?
I've got no advice for teachers. The same settings apply.
Speaking of teachers,
They're all doing a fantastic job. I'm not here to report I'm not here to report a change. They'll continue on Monday and throughout the rest of today and Tuesday, just as they're already planning, and we'll get advice to them as soon as we possibly can.
We'll be going to cabinet later, and in other jurisdictions in Europe, teachers have become a priority for vaccination, particularly as kids are getting sick. And I know you said there's not enough vaccines, but will you be advocating, and I know it's a federal issue, would you be advocating that teachers become a priority for vaccinations?
Look, we have to work through what Delta variant means for different cohorts. There were some questions before about priorities. I think some of those are very difficult judgments to make unless and until you know how much vaccine is coming. Again, I'm sure people at home watching this, listening to this, would appreciate that trying to ration something when you don't, like, how thinly do you slice the loaf? You don't know how much you've got, or whether there's going to be 1 million doses be brought forward next month, or whatever it might be. It's very, very challenging, and there are lots of worthy claims. But given that kids are a significant feature of Delta outbreaks, then the notion that schools would be open because teachers had been vaccinated, like, you might well find that schools being open contributed to that Delta outbreak in the future getting worse. That's why they're closed now.
Should be advocating for kids to get vaccinated if we had the capacity?
Well, we had a question earlier on about the TGA having paved the way for that to happen. So that's obviously a good thing. We want to look. This is really simple. We want to get everybody vaccinated as fast as we can. It's challenging because we don't have the supply we need right now, but that's coming. And I'm sure we'll be briefed this afternoon at National Cabinet by General Fruin about that rollout plan. No doubt the rollout plan across the nation will take account of the TGA's decision today to include kids. The list goes on.
and speaking of teachers, they've launched a campaign today to get paid overtime. They say they're not getting paid appropriate overtime, and they've appealed to the government to allocate more funds.
Well, I will boldly predict, Nick, there'll be many more appeals. It's an enterprise bargain after all. And with the greatest of respect to the assembled media, we don't negotiate enterprise bargains at press conferences. We sit down and go through that in good faith. Our teachers do a fantastic job. Let's never forget the support staff as well. They do a fantastic job, and we'll get a fair and reasonable outcome, a balanced outcome that honours the teaching profession and those who support them, but also leaves enough money in the budget to keep employing more of them and keep building schools and deal with all the other challenges we face.
How many percent of people in hospitals have been vaccinated?
I don't have that information. I'm not sure whether we do we.
None to answer.
None have been vaccinated.
We believe. Let's confirm that for you, though. Sure, absolutely.
Sorry. Jerome, just to clarify for the 4 individuals, the 4 people we believe may have been out of community.
Yep.
Can you just work that right out? The people who were connected by household contacts, we know where they visited.
Yeah, so two of the individuals who had a brief 1 day of exposure in the community, they are 2 household members of the AB Park case that we reported yesterday. The exposure sites are primarily in the Malvern area, so they were listed late last night and this morning, a number of primarily tier 2 exposure sites. Obviously we're working closely with those individuals, the usual things, we download the QR codes, we'll be in touch with those primary close contacts over the coming hours.
Have you figured out what happened with the aged care situation in Hoppers Crossing, and how that happened?
Yeah, look, I think the Hoppers Crossing, drama of yesterday afternoon was ultimately it was a case of a past infection. So somebody who was no longer infectious, they had a slight detect on a coronavirus test. I know there was a bit of media interest in that yesterday afternoon, but this is, there are well-established procedures in the hospital sector and in the aged care sector to handling all this. Hoppers Point, the RACF responded appropriately. There was no drama. The person was not infectious, and everything went smoothly.
How long was the lockdown for?
I don't know, Nick, but I mean, look, I think this is we need to be very careful in this environment we're in, and we're all heightened. We're all very attuned to what may be happening. There was no drama around Hoppers Crossing yesterday. There was a set of procedures within the aged care sector, well versed and well tested in these things, as there are in the hospital sector. We had a case who we thought at one point might have been infectious. It was a very low detect. He was retested. It was determined to be an old infection. Presented no danger, and the response was stood down.
How are we tracking vaccination rates amongst workers in aged care facilities? And is there anything more we can do to make sure we get those rates right?
Yeah, so obviously, as a state, we have responsibility for ensuring that certainly the public sector, residential aged care staff and residents are vaccinated. That programme continues to roll on, and I should stress that all the state vaccination clinics, 78 vaccination clinics, are providing priority access for aged care workforces of both the private sector and the public sector on an ongoing basis. So if you work in aged care in Victoria, if you're a worker, if you've not had your first dose or your second dose, you should come forward and get it done today.
And we've seen a number of outdoor transmission sites in the park and at the MCG. Is there any consideration being given to other outdoor areas such as shopping strips or parks, given how contagious this new variant is? Will we likely to see those added to the exposure sites?
Well, sure. So, I mean, in terms of exposure sites, we put out there the exposure sites where we know positive cases have been, so that members of the community can identify if they've been there and seek appropriate support and isolate where necessary. Obviously, we're in lockdown at the moment, so we don't see many of those big gathering places at all at the moment, so the risk at this moment in time is very low. We will, as we go forward, and it'll be ultimately Brett's advice that will drive this, explore what the future settings should be, and that's, of course, a conversation for another time. Rich.
Yesterday, that certain procedures were closed by midday, even had to wait 5-6 hours. Have you considered maybe additional pop-up clinics in residential areas or?
Which ones were closed?
So we've got they were closed in Albert Park, Port Melbourne and Albert Park. The park was closed by midday.
Right. So I mean, look, there are over 200 testing facilities in the state's network. Most of our facilities at the moment, the big state ones, are running at least 12-hour days. We're running them from 8 till 8, some from 7 till 7. We've got showgrounds open even earlier and even later. So there's a range of testing sites available. There are some small private testing clinics that operate as well. There's also GP respiratory clinics that operate as well. They operate under a whole range of different hours and arrangements, as either funded by the Commonwealth or funded by those private operators. We encourage them, of course, to stand up when we have a significant outbreak. As we've been reporting over the last few days, testing numbers are coming down. As we would expect to see, as we go into lockdown, we see fewer opportunities for transmission, fewer seasonal colds and flus, and therefore fewer people getting tested. But still, 45,000 today is a pretty healthy number, and we'd expect and want to keep our overall testing numbers up. I'm happy to take on notice individual private sites that close down, but that's not really one that we can control directly. Rich?
With Amy Park,
yeah.
Did you reduce CCTV for people going in, and what were the masks wearing like? People not wearing masks, so we're crowding into those gates?
Oh, look, I think there was a range of behaviours, and the Amy Park crowds, we've revisited that 2 or 3 times now as more evidence has come to light. But both, the two transmissions we believe happened on the way into the ground, both at Gate 6 and at Gate 7, were with people who were packed close together and who were taking a long time to work through that queue, and that's clearly a matter of concern for us. Only a couple of days ago, we extended our Tier 1 definition again to more people in those crowds. We really are very concerned about that risk of transmission at that particular game. But look, and there's a range of behaviours, Rich. I mean, there are people there wearing masks, people not wearing masks, people far close together. And this is, again, why we keep saying socially distancing is so important. If you can't socially distance, wear a mask, and we will be, I suspect, in that environment for a while yet.
We've noted that we're at market now for more than 24 hours.
Yeah.
There's 958 people from that QR code system, but only a quarter of them have come forward. That's a low number.
No, it's not, because we've got, as you say, 950 odd people who've been identified. We identified them right, as in the early hours of identifying the market as an exposure site. QR code system again kicking into gear. What I said this morning is a quarter of them have returned a negative test result. So takes 92% of people return a result within 24 hours. There'll be more results coming in during the early hours of this morning and today. I expect that number to rise a lot over the next 24 hours.
The 958 have come forward for a test.
Well, I track them. I think we do a pretty good job of this here in Victoria. We track people. We match them as those test results come in. We don't. When people come to get tested, we don't ask them which site they've been to. We don't record that separately. There's enough data collection we do, and I think capturing it the way we do is pretty effective.
Is 958 customers and staff, or is there a separate QR?
No, it's the same. So it's 958 people in total have been identified as associated with Prahran Market. And again, as I said yesterday, if you've been to Prahran Market, if you didn't use a QR code, if you forgot or whatever else happened, if you were there that Saturday morning, please come forward to get tested and we'll happily add you to the numbers and show how they increase.
What about Amy Park and MCG? We've had outbreaks now with 3 mass public so are you confident we can capture everyone in those?
It's a good question. We have about 3,500 people at the MCG. We've got about 2,000 or so at Amy Park. These are big cohorts of people, and I absolutely recognise. During the course of the last 12 days, we've revisited those sites a couple of times. We increased our Tier 1 definition around the MCC reserve at least once. We've increased our definition to include people on the outside of the ground at Amy Park. We're very confident. We've taken a very cautious approach by now around how we treat those two grounds. There's a lot of people not only getting their first tests, but especially as we go to day 13 tests over the next few days, all those people need to go through and clear a negative result before we'll release them.
Professor Sutton, can we just ask you, the results from the Prahran Market, are they really the sort of the key to being able to open up on Tuesday? Are they the main concerns at the moment, the main unknown at the moment?
At the moment, they're the main unknown. Obviously, we also want this tram trip to be tracked down. It'll be very few people, but it's a priority in terms of new exposure sites as well. Those additional Tier 2 sites in Malvern are likely to be lower risk. We've classified them as lower risk. We've been surprised before by detecting transmission at Tier 2 sites. So we need to be open-minded about what might turn up over the next few days. But at the moment, Prahran Market test results will be a focus for today, no question.
How concerned are you about Prahran?
Look, I think people have done QR code check-ins very well. That's absolutely a positive. We're getting people coming forward for testing very quickly. That's also positive, and it hasn't been that long ago. I expect that we'll get good coverage of those results over the next 24 hours.
Brad, yesterday you said you were hoping for 0 cases in the community today. Now we've got 4. How will this impact how we come out of lockdown? And is this the new way we need to look at it rather than total case numbers, those in the community?
Yeah, we're certainly focused on those who've had a time potentially infectious in the community. Those numbers remain small. They are a small percentage of our total cases every day. That's the figure that I would love to see get down to 0. It may happen today, it may happen tomorrow, who knows? But that's what we would ideally aim for. When it doesn't occur, and sometimes that's because there is a new classification or there's transmission that's happened at one of those sites where we wouldn't necessarily have expected it, then we've got some other exposures to chase down. So there might be people who are out in the community when infectious, but when we can find those individuals, when the numbers are small, when we get to them quickly, that's much less of concern. So it's not all on getting to that 0, that's the ideal, but we can certainly manage some community exposures anyway. That's how we've run this through over the last 10 days.
Are we on track to come out of lockdown on Tuesday then?
Look, it's on track. We need to see what today, tomorrow, the weekend brings.
What do you make of an immunocompromised Victorian man being put into a medi-hotel?
Sorry?
What do you make of an immunocompromised Victorian man being put into a medi-hotel?
Look, there are a number of people who are managed in medi-hotels with complex health issues. Those assessments are not mine. They're made by the medical team at CQV and those who are running the medi-hotels. They are looking at whether their medical needs can be best met in that setting. There is no perfect place for individuals. If they're at home, there is a risk that their quarantine might be breached. Of course, we receive assurances from them that they will quarantine appropriately. We can't check each and every person who's in quarantine in the community, so there's a risk whatever way you look at it. The assessments will be made on whether their medical needs can be met in a medi-hotel, and if they are satisfied through the exemptions team that's the case, then they don't provide for that exemption. That can be reviewed based on additional information or an appeal.
Just on Noel's earlier question,
We just review over the coming days. There's no information that I have. There's no advice that I would give today in relation to that.
Fred, do you support the Premier's call for a arena still around Sydney?
I've always said any jurisdiction's issue is every jurisdiction's issue. So, of course, we need to maintain the fullest limitation of movement that can feasibly be done. And for those who are essential workers or need to move across regions or indeed state and territory boundaries, then we need to manage that through a surveillance program, through obligations for those individuals, and indeed, potential prioritisation for them in a vaccination program, in particular in New South Wales. So all of those measures, I think, have a role to play.
How many people have granted red zone extensions for return to New South Wales?
I don't know the number for today. Yeah, we can get it for you.
Premier, I guess that's the question I'm looking for. People before the